Okay, how are you?
Good, good. How about now?
Yeah, that's good. It was my apologies.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, I messaged you. I said I wanted to see if you wanted to continue the discussion, but this time it might be more fruitful if it's just one-on-one discussion.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. Go ahead.
yeah. So the last time I'm trying to recall. I think our discussion was about whether the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam condones uh, spousal or wife beating.
Yes.
Since the last time we talked, do you feel like you've came to like a different consideration or have figured some things out, or would you say you still have the same position?
I do hold the same position. Yes.
Okay, I guess what was unconvincing about the Muad's explanation of like the verses and like the hadiths.
I think again. So I know him as he said his name is Muad. Muad. He. I think it's fair to say that he strawmanned my position, that he was not engaging with intellectual integrity as it pertains to what I submitted. So that was my first issue. I don't think he accurately defended the 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 his position. I don't think that his defense was strong because he did not go into the grammar of Surah um, 434. Instead, he used a description of Job's uh, Job's uh, Job's lack of judgment pertaining to his wife. He used that descriptive narrative and he projected that onto a clear and transparent prescription for wife beating in Surah 434. He did that without justification, as far as I recall. So he did that without justification, and when I protested that kind of defense, I think we just were talking past each other at that point. And so, and I'm not convinced that he gave a good defense. What he tried to do was intellectually dishonest because he tried to say that because Job in this isolated event was told to beat his wife with 100 stems of grass, that this is how wife beating should be conducted in Islam. He lied about that. He lied about that because in the narrative that I brought, which is the hadith, where a husband was beating his wife, she was badly bruised. Severe ecchymosis had been apparent because Aisha protested and said her bruises are as green as a garment. 100 uh, stems of grass, blades of grass, isn't going to do that to her. So there was a kind of wife beating that was taking place in their marriage. And when Muhammad was confronted with it, he did not protest against it. He did not instruct against it. Not in that instant. It was Aisha who protested against it. Moreover, I'm sorry, I forgot the point that I was going to make. So those are some of the reasons from what I remember. These are reasons I left that conversation unconvinced that there is a good defense and that Muhammad demonstrated some kind of exemplary moral character.
Yeah, so there was a couple of things that I wanted to separate the last time. One was like because in some I think the one time you mentioned about like how Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of one of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what she observed about the wives of people during that time, and whether that could support the claim you're trying to make, which is this kind of like normative claim. Give me 1 second. Hold on. The claim you're trying to make, because remember the argument you're trying to make is that Islam condones wife beating, like it allows that. So when we see instances of like Aisha or whoever saying this is what I have observed, that's not like her saying this is what ought to be the case. It's not like she said, this is what I observed, and I am glad this happened. Or, I observed this, and alhamdulillah, praise be to God. These people are following Islam correctly. Um Now, so those things have, I think has to be, so I think those things have to be teased out. Now in terms of like um yeah, there was something else. There was something else. I mean, there was another point about like how um what what is going to convince you at all. So like Muad gave explanations. You felt like they're not convincing. It seems like I'm prepared to go into the verse. I'm prepared to contextualize the hadith. I'm prepared to look at counter examples. And I think I brought that up last time. Like, hey, how do you square this with like counter examples? I'm prepared to do all of that. But if at the end of the day, you could always say, well, I'm just practicing taqiyya, I'm just lying, or I'm just being dishonest, then there's really nothing I can say that would convince you. Like if you already made up your mind, and there's nothing at all that will convince you. Even if the Prophet ﷺ came and told you himself that no, I don't condone wife beating, you could always say, well, this is all just a lie, or you may even say the Prophet's lying. So the question is like, what would convince you?
That is a good question. So I'm looking at least two foundations. One is the prescription within the Quran. Two, the actions of Muhammad. The actions of Muhammad are congruent with the prescription in Islam. Therefore, Islam condones wife beating. That is my deductive syllogism. It would be premise one: the Quran prescribes wife beating. Premise two: Muhammad acted in congruence, in a consistent manner with that prescription, both in his articulation of Islamic jurisprudence when confronted with a, a scenario where wife beating was involved, and in his personal life. Therefore, Islam condones wife beating. For Muhammad to say that to me now, I'm well aware that Islam has internal contradictions. You may say that it doesn't. If Muhammad were to come to me, or if I lived in that time, if we were to apply some retrospective hypothesis, and I lived in the time of Muhammad, and he were to come to me and say, I don't condone wife beating, Allah does not condone wife beating, um, then that I would see that as I would see that as a contradiction, and I would ask him to resolve it. And he can give me his uh, tafsir, the verbatim, his interpretation, if you will, on Surah 434, on the narrations where he either himself in a personal capacity was involved with wife beating, or allowed it, or was more sympathetic to a husband beating his wife than he was to a wife being beaten by her husband. Mind you, in that very narration that I'm referencing, that I'm alluding to, Muhammad instructed her, he prescribed to her that she must first sleep with her husband before she could divorce him, before she's able to divorce him, which is another implication in of itself as far as I'm concerned. But we're speaking very specifically about domestic violence being sanctioned in Islam. And I think I've laid out my premises, I've given you my conclusion, and this is why I walked away from the conversation unconvinced that there is a sufficient rebuttal for this argument, and I'm still open to hearing you.
Yeah, I think it still seems like we're back in this. I'm still faced with the dilemma. The reason is because so the premises you mentioned, um, that's kind of like where the issue between you and I are. So the first premise, the Quran condones wife beating. The second premise is this is also practiced by the Prophet ﷺ himself and companions and so on. But I disagree with those premises. But it's not just that I disagree with those premises. Sorry, I don't know if I can't I don't know if I misspoke. So the first premise you're saying is that the Quran condones wife beating. So okay, so now with those premises, yeah, I would say that they're false. But it's not just that I would say that they're false. I'm not aware of any um, credible Islamic scholar, um, even any credible academic reference that would say that those premises are true. In fact, they would. In fact, the only source that I'm aware of that would attest to those premises um, are Islamophobes. So like these kind of like bigoted, racist, Islamophobic websites that you might go like not you, but that people might go to or refer to. There are people out there by the name of like David Wood and God Logic and those people. But and then there's others. There's one guy who comes to Robert Spencer. I think that's his name. There are a lot of Islamophobes. Ion Hersey is another one. She's not, of the same like ilk, but there are countless, and I'm only aware of them, though, that camp who would attest to the premises, who would say like, what you're, who would agree with your premises. But outside of that, and I'm not saying like, oh, I disagree with them just because they're Islamophobes. I know that's controversial. Some people think like it's unfair, or like it's just it's just like victim is like like what's the word, like I'm just kind of playing the victim of just like calling everybody an Islamophobe. So forget all that. The point is, uh I'm only aware of non-credible sources, non-credible references, like people like them who would say that this is true. So what are we, there's three people in this room, and there might be people who listen to this later. What are we supposed to do with your premises? Are we supposed to just take them on blind faith?
Allow me to read Ibn Kathir's tafsir on Surah 434, because you appeal to Islamic scholars on this issue to argue that Islam does not agree with the premises that I have laid out. So Ibn Kathir says, abandon them in their beds. Um, he says the abandonment refers to not having intercourse with her, to lie on her bed with his back to her. Several others said similarly, as Sudi ad Da'ak. I'm not going to pronounce these other names. Nevertheless, he goes on to say, beat them. Means if advice and ignoring her in the bed do not produce the desired result, you are allowed to discipline the wife without severe beating. Muslim, this would be Sahih Muslim, recorded that Jabir said that during the farewell, oh, he said this during the farewell Hajj. So the Prophet says, okay, according to Jabir, he says, if advice and ignoring her in the bed do not produce the desired results, you are allowed to discipline the wife without severe beating. Uh, Dawood, are you being intellectually honest with your religion?
Yeah, but wait. So did you? Are you're so you're saying so you're responding to me, right? Because I was talking about like credible sources, so, and so you're saying like these are credible sources who are agreeing that. So so you're saying that these are the sources that are saying that um, that the Quran is insinuating to beat your spouses, right? My question is then why is it the case that no Muslim understands it this way?
The Within the hadith that I brought to you, Dawood, I should bring that hadith back because my simple question would be to you, because this man comes to Muhammad for counsel. Was he a Muslim? And if he was a Muslim, he was beating his wife, and in that hadith, he's beating his wife. He brings he they come to, or rather, the wife comes to Muhammad because she desires to be divorced from him, and it is evident that he is physically abusive to her. And Muhammad does not protest against the domestic violence that is present within them, the marriage of the two parties that he's counseling. Instead, he focuses on justifying the husband in his plight. Your position, Dawood, has already fallen apart because I've not only justified and demonstrated that the premises are true, but I've demonstrated, and this is would be the second time, that the conclusion also follows. Because within Islamic jurisprudence, wife beating is sanctioned. Now, you would ask me a question such as, why is it that no Muslim understands it this way? That is because you are a good man and you do not believe in beating your wife because you love your wife. But not all Muslims think like you. Today, Muslims are beating their wives. This is why, uh, um, what is the organization for human rights or women's rights specifically? This is why these reports were done on domestic violence in places like Pakistan. And per capita, Pakistan, if I'm not, I'm citing really old research from years ago. I haven't looked at these statistics for some time, but that is why per capita, Pakistan scores higher than any other country for um, what is it? It is the infringement on women's rights. It is the rape and abuse of women from their family members in predominantly Muslim homes, and domestic violence, physical abuse against women in Muslim homes. That would I don't know what you've been told, my friend. All Muslims do not believe as you do. And I submit to you that you are better than them and you are better than Muhammad. That's my position and that's my answer.
Oh, okay, so I'm gonna have to ask. So you said you don't like it when I interrupt. I don't either. So I'm gonna have to ask uh I'm not going to interrupt you, but I do want your response to be a bit shorter because I want to like narrow in on the question that I'm asking. Um, I'm trying to connect like what Muslims under. So I'm trying to scrutinize and question why we should take your you listed the premise, and you're a smart guy. You sound to me like you have studied or have read philosophy before. So you list out these premises. You know how difficult it is to construct an argument. It's not as easy and as simple as many people think, and you happen to have done it in a in logically valid form, right? So now I'm trying to interrogate that a little bit and figure out if are these premises substantiated, or should we take them on blind faith? So I'm circling back to that over and over again. The verse you gave me, it's great. You're going to Ibn Kathir and so on, and I'm trying to push that further and ask if Ibn Kathir read, if you're reading the verse in that way, and Ibn Kathir supports you, who is a classical scholar, then why is it the case that no one else reads it that way except for Islamophobes? I want you to think about that question, and I want people in the room to think about that question as well. And people can like mouth off in the chat, that's fine. But there's going to be more people listening to this. And I want everybody to think about this. Why is it only Islamophobes? Resurrected's answer is, well, because I'm a nice guy. Really? And that's the reason for all other Muslims as well? That we're just nice people? Resurrected also mentioned, he also mentioned well, you have the case of like, all these human rights atrocities and like, people, domestic crimes and abuses all over the world. The world. Do you have any study that links that to like this verse that says that this verse is the motivating factor, or is domestic abuse a much wider and more complex phenomena? Because last time I checked, I didn't think domestic abuse. Actually, I'll even give you an example. I'm Eritrean. Do you know there's been many cases. I know this from my own lived experience of being Eritrean. Eritrea, by the way, is a country that's not predominantly Muslim, right? It's like I think it's like 50-50. There's like Muslims and Christians. And actually, a lot of the domestic abuse that I grew up hearing about from like other Eritrean communities happen to have come from Christian homes. So is there like a Eritrean problem with like domestic abuse? So this is really pardon me, but this is really silly and oversimplistic. I like to get down to like the research, and I'm trying to press you to like think critically about these these great claims, like these oversimplistic grandiose claims that we're making about all people. So before we get into like the people and like Muslims being nice and stuff, or I being nice and loving my wife, but then all other Muslims kind of like hate their wives or whatever, let's talk about what supports the truth, your reading of this verse. What supports that? Is it just this classical scholar? And if so, how come no one else has come to that same understanding? Shouldn't that raise concerns?
While you were speaking, so I do oblige to being more succinct in my responses. I'll ask you respectfully to do the same. So if we can do this in a very linear fashion, I think we can all benefit from that. So firstly, so let's take this one step at a time, if you're willing. You're making a claim, a false generalization. I was trying to remember which logical fallacy it is, where you're claiming that no other Muslim reads this or interprets this as I do, can you substantiate that claim?
uh that no one reads it. uh yeah, I mean, so the best way I can substantiate that is to say, I mean, well, let me ask, I mean, how, what would be sufficient in terms of like substantiating that claim? I have my
Okay,
ways,
then.
but I feel like it may not be sufficient.
Well, let's lay out a criterion. You know, so a falsifiable claim. Or let me say it this way: in order to falsify that claim, I would need to find at least one other Muslim that reads it that way. Correct?
No, no. And so that's why, no, because I didn't mean it literal. So I'm glad you asked this, because I was gonna say, like, I have my ways, but it's not clear what's sufficient. So when I say no other, I mean like no. So I mean like no credible person, like in the field. So when I talk about like these things, I think about like what is like taken seriously in the field, what is kind of like a reasonable view within the field, and then the views that are just like outliers, like that is just completely not taken seriously at all. In fact, to espouse such views, you're already stigmatized. And I think for good reasons in some cases. So for example, if you come into like some science, I would assume you come into like some science fields trying to espouse this like flat earth theory. Yeah, there could be some like former
I'm so
sorry.
sorry, but hopefully we do have an agreement to be succinct and linear, so that we can make progress. Can we do that?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you got the point. I think you get the point. So
Okay, so a classical, reputable scholar is it's the barometer, is the benchmark for whether or not your claim has been demonstrated to be false. Like you're
no.
hypothetical because no, but you just gave me that criterion, and now I'm offering you. I'm answering that criterion, or I'm supplying you with that criteria, and you're now rejecting it. So what I'm observing, though, is that you're moving the goalpost in order to maintain your position. How do you respond?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do earlier. You said you want me to be and I get it. I should be succinct, but it's hard to be succinct if I have to like I have to mention some of these things. So I have to say, uh, this is just helpful information. Forget about Islam. So in academia, um, you have views that are taken seriously because they have been scrutinized, they have been discussed, they have been assessed by a plethora of scholars. And then you have some views that are reasonable. So you have views that are like, many people take. You have some views that contend with those views. And it's also like a good handful of people who take those views as well. You have some like minority views that are just like not strong, and like they're maybe they're reasonable, but it's like a more minority of people who hold those views. And then you have some views that are just complete outliers. And I try to use an analogy, like in science. I mean, I want you to think about, like, I don't know if you have a science background. I certainly don't. But imagine if we're like in a field of science, and we have like some former scientist or someone with somewhat of a background in science trying to advance the flat earther theory or the flat earther thesis that the earth is flat. Now that view is not, you can say like, yeah, but there's this classic scholar that held this view. Yeah, but that's not a view that's not taken at seriously at all. It is a view that happens to be taken seriously online. It is a view that happens to be taken very seriously by conspiracy theorists. So as rational beings, as critical thinkers, I don't know. Some of the stuff I'm saying to you, by the way, I should say that I'm taking for granted is only going to land for some people. Some people happen to be conspiracy theorists. I'm just hoping and praying that you're not one of those people, because if you are, all of this is just you're going to disagree with every single thing that I'm saying. But I just want you to see the analogy. How, yeah, you could have some like there's always, you're always going to have like some weird person out there, maybe two, maybe three, maybe even a handful, that's going to espouse some view. But the question, one of the ways we as rational beings who are not experts, I'm not an expert in science, I don't know if you are, but one of the ways we can tell whether this is a view we should take seriously, whether this is a view we should even debate on Clubhouse, i.e., flat earther theory, is is this a theory that people in the field, that other experts take seriously? Is this even a reasonable view? I'm not saying it has to be the mainstream view. Is it even a reasonable view, a legitimate diverging view? Or is this like a complete outlier? And what I was saying about the wives beating thing, that's a complete outlier. That's like flat earther stuff. I mean, so one of the ways I can substantiate this is, I mean, I can send you, I can like look at art, I can reference many articles. I actually happen to have studied with one, a professor. So you can look her up. I'm giving references. She's a professor at Howard University. She's teaches Islamic studies. I studied with her personally on for many times. She has her article on Maqasid al-Quraniya, like principles of looking at the Quran. Anyways, story short, because you told me to be succinct. She has an article where she talks about like the wife beating view, the wife beating verse, and how, people think it means one thing, but she makes a good case of how it means something else. It happens to be a view that I slightly disagree with, but she makes her case, and she's a legitimate academic, a professor at Howard University. You can look her up. Her name is Zainab Alwani. Zainab Alwani. And if you're gonna dismiss her, now she knows about Ibn Kathir, she knows about many other scholars. But if you just dismiss her view for like no reason, if you think like, yeah, I'm just dismissing her view because here's another nice Muslim, kind of like me, I'm a nice Muslim, she's a nice Muslim. That just doesn't make any sense. That's not really like academic. You have to have strong arguments for why would we dismiss her view. Actually, it even raises another question, because when it comes to Islamic scholarship, there's been a big problem how it's been mainly dominated by men. There's been this call to have more women contribute to the field of Islamic studies. So the funny thing is, why wouldn't you want to take a woman's view? Is there something wrong with her by virtue of being a woman, that she can't contribute to the discourse on what these verses mean?
I mean, so that would I do enjoy listening to you. I genuinely do. I do not, however, enjoy us agreeing to be succinct and you breaking those stipulations, because ultimately, now ultimately you put me at a disadvantage because I cannot retain all of that. There's a lot that I would like to respond to, and some that I may not uh, want to respond to, nor may be relevant to the conversation. I would like to focus on the subject matter. I can easily go to Ibn Kathir, and he's referencing hadiths which say things like, if Allah were to tell anyone to prostrate to anyone, he would tell women to prostrate to their husbands because of the enormity of, how did they say it? The enormity of authority or responsibility. I can't recall exactly what he said, but the enormity of their authority above women. Now, what you are presenting to me, Dawood, is a contemporary progressive Islam. And I've heard it being preached by persons who claim to be Islamic and practice homosexuality, persons who claim to be Islamic and practice all sorts of things that may not be consistent with Islam. If what you are aiming for is a progressive Islam, then go for it, my friend. I will not protest it. Be more contemporary, be more modern as to oppose the things that are established in Islam, but do not tell me that Ibn Kathir is wrong and Muhammad is wrong and the Quran is wrong, because that is what I am hearing. Let me ask you a question so that we can be very, very linear and succinct. Is the Quran in error when it says beat your wife, when it says um, stay apart from them in beds, separate from them in beds, and if they still do not obey, beat them? Is the Quran wrong?
No, no, I don't believe so.
Thank you. The Quran is not wrong. Let me ask you another question, Dawood. Is Ibn Kathir wrong when he interprets that very surah, that very verse, to say beat them?
I
Is
wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't say he's wrong. No,
Okay, so Ibn Kathir isn't wrong. The Quran is wrong. Was Muhammad wrong when he did not protest the wife that was being beaten by her husband, but instead he focused on validating and justifying the husband's claim that his wife desires to be divorced and remarry another, and she has lied about him concerning him being limp? It was Muhammad wrong to stay silent on the fact that he was beating his wife? Not
no,
that
no.
not husband. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just. I don't believe the Prophet ﷺ was wrong in anything he did.
Granted, was Muhammad wrong when he hit Aisha, causing her pain?
I don't think he was wrong in anything he did.
So those are four. Those are four examples and premises, beginning with a prescription in the Quran. You are standing in opposition to this because you now I'm recognizing that you're a progressive Muslim, and that is fine. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. Referencing a paper by a professor that you know is not going to change what is established in Islam from the very foundation, which is the Quran, to the Sunnah of Muhammad. Wife beating is sanctioned. You either, as a Muslim, need to acquiesce to this and fall in line with it, or protest against it as a progressive Muslim, recognizing that Islam is not congruent with the values that we hold dear today. And that's what I observe. And that's I hope I was succinct enough.
Yeah. No, no, no. So, to your first point about the succinctness, that's fine. I think you can. I think you can. I apologize. I should not have said. I should not have tried to like restrict you. I try to let people speak. The reason why I said that is because I tend to. I will let you speak for as long as you want. I don't have like. I don't tend to like to cut people off because I feel like it's really rude. Sometimes you have a train of thought, and I don't want to interrupt it. So that's kind of why I was saying like that, and I get that it applies to me as well. I'm really trying my best to not say things that doesn't need to be said necessarily. So yeah, feel free to speak freely. Feel free. All I just wanted to say by that about the succinctness is I think it's preferable we kind of narrow down our disagreements to like different points, like point by point. The reason is because, for example, like the hadith that you brought up, I think is going to be a completely different thing. I disagree with the way you're framing and like the way you're framing that incident with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So that's going to be a separate thing. What I really want to what I want to kind of like get us down to is this. You and I, we can walk away from here. I think from what I remember, you're Christian. We can walk away holding to our beliefs. I'm Muslim. It's very unlikely that I'm going to change at the end of this conversation. You're Christian. It's very unlikely that you're going to change at the end of this conversation. So we're both going to go our ways. But at the very least, I want us to like, I want you and I to both agree on what it is we're disagreeing. Where I say, oh, okay, I understand where you're coming from, resurrected. I don't agree with you, but I understand this is your view. It makes sense. And I want you to do the same thing to me, where you're like, okay, it makes sense, but I just don't agree. And then we can still go home and I'm a Muslim, you're a Christian. That's actually where I'm trying to get us to. And to do that, I'm just trying to figure out different ways to help you understand what I personally think is the mistake you're making. The mistake you're making, I think, is a general mistake. It has nothing to do with Islam, but it's like a mistake on like how you're approaching just a text. And this could be a problem whether you're approaching whether you approach philosophical texts this way, religious texts this way, and other types of texts this way. So with this text, it seems like so let me just touch with maybe one or two points you mentioned. First, you set the progressive view. Yeah, okay, maybe I have the progressive view, but what's wrong with that? I think the interesting thing is, why does it have to be the case that Ibn Kathir figured out what the Quran means? Like Ibn Kathir's reading of the Quran is the definitive reading of the Quran. Now, it seems to me that just seems strange because it seems to me, and I notice a lot of people who attack Islam. Not saying you're doing that, but a lot of people who attack Islam like to go to Ibn Kathir. And one of the things I always wonder is, wait a minute, why like why do we have reason? Why does anyone have reason to believe like that's going to be the definitive reason? The definitive reading. Sorry, the definitive reading. And it seems to me like people are just jumping on Ibn Kathir because it makes their it makes their argument easier to make. Like, oh, I can portray this claim of like I could advance this claim that the Quran is like patriarchal, misogynistic, oppressive to women, oppressive to everyone, in fact, even to non-Muslims. And then all I have to do is read Ibn Kathir. But then is that really like the Quran or is it Ibn Kathir? Now, it's one thing if you say, but I actually have strong reasons for saying we ought to go to Ibn Kathir and ignore everybody else. Like if I give you contemporaries, yeah, what's wrong? What's wrong with them? If I give you Ibn Kathir is like one tafsir out of several tafsirs. And so I think that just raises a bunch of questions. I'm sure you have answers. I'm sure you maybe have this thought out. Maybe you have your reasons for why you're choosing Ibn Kathir. But the question is it really strong reasons? Is it so strong that it's going to convince me and other people that yeah, this is the definitive reading? I mean, think about it. Think about it another way. The Quran, all Muslims believe the Quran, right, is supposed to be in line with our moral dispositions, our moral judgments, and it's supposed to be in line with common sense. You and I both know that a religious scripture that's preaching spousal abuse is not commonsensical and it's not in line with our moral judgments. So somehow you wanna have Muslims believe. I just don't see it. I don't know why. Maybe there's something I'm missing, and maybe I'm just not finding. Maybe I'm not explaining this well on like how to help you see the mistake that I think you're making.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. That was my wife. All right. If you can go back to maybe you are a progressive Muslim. Why does Ibn Kathir get to define your religion for you? I'm listening.
Oh yeah. Well, I was saying, why does? Well, I guess another way. Let me put it this way. This is going to sound a bit like off topic, but I promise it's relevant, and I'll help you see like what the issue is that I'm not understanding. When I listen to somebody like Sam Harris, for example, He's an atheist, militant atheist, Islamophobe. He attacks Islam, made a career out of doing that. When he goes and says like, the Quran and the Prophet, they kind of like lead to ISIS. Like if you take Islam seriously, you're gonna follow ISIS. And he's like, ISIS, they are accurately following the Quran, and that's his worry. And he's like, all these Muslims, all the Muslims in the world, they're not practicing Muslims, and that's why the world is peaceful. Most Muslims are peaceful because they're actually not following the Quran. But if you actually follow the Quran, you're going to become like ISIS. Now, one thing one strange thing about that argument that just never made sense to me, and I kind of feel like some of that is going on here with the wife beating, is Sam Harris tends to read the Quran in a very, very narrow way, in a very selective way, very selective, which just completely ignores all the scholarship, all like everything else, that all the work that has been done on the Quran. And he reads it very selectively in a way that aligns with ISIS. And then he uses that to say like, Islam is not true. What doesn't add up to me is like, well, of course it's not going to be true if you have that reading. But it's weird how he's going to say like that reading is the stronger reading. Do you know what I mean? So like usually when you're trying to look for something that would be the stronger reading, it's going to be something that's that aligns with common sense, right? Like when people read scripture and read works of like philosophy, for example, people try to read them in ways where they apply the principle of charity. So you try to read it in a way where it's like, okay, I want to kind of like steelman it, give it the best possible reading, a reading that will kind of like make sense. You want to kind of like make it make sense because it will be a mistake to just kind of like casually read something or read it in a way where you're like, oh, there's all these mistakes and like contradictions, right? But what I don't understand is that's what Sam Harris does. And that's what I'm trying to say here. It seems like you're selectively, you know, Ibn Kathir. But let me take your understanding of Ibn Kathir. Because the deeper question for me is, but why do we have any? He's going to give us the definitive, especially if it happens to go against our morality and our reason.
So, Dawood, one of the things that you will not succeed in doing in this conversation is re what is it? Revising my approach, revising my argument. I think if my argument was some historical submission, sorry, if I was some historian with a view on Islam, perhaps that can work. But I'm speaking to you here and now, and I'm giving you my arguments. I'm listening to your responses, and I think what you're attempting to do is just give me 1 second. Down. Apologies.
No worries, take your time.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just corresponding with my wife there. All right. Just let me reply. I'll be right back with you. There we go. All right. Thank you. Down. Just give me 1 second again. All right. Yes. Where was I? Okay. So I'm listening. I'm listening to you here and now. I've asked you I've asked you about your perspective on what the Quran says, and and your perspective on what Muhammad does, and your perspective on what the reputable classical scholars of your religion say. And all of those questions led you to my conclusion, which is that Islam sanctions wife beating. You come away from that to say to invite this red herring about Sam Harris and Islamophobes and so on, to say, well, I do agree with you. Just let me take this call. I'll be right with you. All right, now everyone is really out of the room. All right, I'm back down. No
Nope.
apologies.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, Dawood, so I've laid out premises for you. You've walked with me all the way to the conclusion, only to go back to introduce this kind of red herring, this kind of straw man to say, well, this is an Islamophobic perspective to view Islam in the worst way and to formulate the kind of argument that Sam Harris formulates, which is that if everyone agreed with Muhammad and actually followed Islam, everyone would be jihadis. And we can test whether or not that is true. Do you disagree with Muhammad when he says to the man who killed his wife, the mother of his children, and smeared her blood over his either adopted child or his own child, when he stabbed her with a knife in her guts in the Hadith? Do you agree with Muhammad when he says, no vengeance should be taken on this man because he said that his wife used to, what is the word that was used? Uh, she used to rail against Muhammad. She used to um, berate him in private, and he told her to stop, and she would not stop. So he took a knife and he killed her. Do you agree with Muhammad that that is justified?
So, like I said earlier, I agree with everything that the Prophet ﷺ did.
So let's
And
break it
not
down.
only
Okay, what you're agreeing to. You're agreeing that at the very least on a descriptive level, because we're talking about ISIS and so on, and how does Islamic jurisprudence work? It works on it is predicated on precedent, whether Quranic prescriptive or descriptive precedent, or descriptive or prescriptive precedent in the Sunnah of Muhammad. Now, this is a descriptive event. Muhammad is not instructing persons to go kill their wives if they berate Muhammad. Nevertheless, it is a foundational precedent for blasphemy laws within the Sharia of Islam. Now, my question to you was, do you agree with Muhammad when he says this man is justified? And you said yes by default. Paraphrasing, but by default you agree with that. So you believe, at least in this one instant, it is okay for a man to kill his wife, for a man to kill his wife if she berates Muhammad. And so how is Sam Harris wrong?
yeah, I trust me, I really don't mind speaking to that, but I kind of feel like this is going to get to a new topic. I want to finish the wife. So the only reason I used Sam Harris was just to uh, I used him as an analogy, as an example. The example was that when you use people like Ibn Kathir, I was saying it seems I've just it never made sense to me when I was listening to people like Sam Harris why they tend to use a very narrow and selective interpretation, and then go on to say, yeah, this interpretation doesn't make sense. And I'm thinking, like, of course, because it's like a fringe interpretation. Of course, it's not going to make sense. So it's kind of like if I you're a Christian. Imagine if I took a very fringe interpretation of the Bible and I just discounted your entire Bible. I said your Bible doesn't make sense. It's just totally wrong. It's ludicrous. It's not in line. I'll give you an example. I think some people criticize the Bible for saying something like the Earth is only like 6,000 years old or something like that. I'm sure you don't believe that. I think the most fairest and strongest and most rational and reasonable interpretation of like reading verses like that from the Bible is to say that this is kind of maybe symbolic, or biblical scholars have interpret this in other ways that align more with like modern science. But if I was just going to take some fringe interpretation, a very like ludicrous cultish type interpretation, and then use that to say the whole Bible, this is why the Bible is wrong, that just wouldn't be, it's not clear how that would be a good approach to like to like criticism.
Now I hear what you're saying. Do you think Ibn Kathir is fringe?
I don't think he's fringe, but he's like one out of many scholars in tafsir.
Do you think uh, Tazkirul is fringe? Tazkirul, do you think his tafsir is fringe?
You
The Tazkirul Quran, do you think that is a fringe view?
sorry, you're saying.
Right. So I'm looking at a tafsir from Tazkirul, and I'm asking you if Tazkirul Quran, the tafsir on Surah 434, if that is fringe.
Oh, I actually haven't heard of him, but yeah, if you mention his, you can mention his tafsir.
Hmm. Is okay. What I'm observing though, Dawood, is that you're making statements about fringe views, but I'm presenting to you the orthodox views. I'm appealing to your classical scholars, and you do not have a defense against it, except for progressive Islam, which is to go outside of your religion and to surpass the extremities of your religion. And so I think there are a lot of internal problems already, and this is only one of the arguments that I'm presenting, or one of the issues within Islam that I'm presenting to you. And it seems as though your defense is in a state of collapse, because if you can't appeal to your classical scholars for a refutation for this argument, then there's something is in a state of collapse within your understanding of Islam and your orientation of Islam, the way that you practice Islam. There is a disconnect somewhere. Now, that is something that I can help you investigate. I think Islam is false. I don't believe Muhammad was a messenger of God, but that's neither here nor there. We're speaking about wife beating in Islam, and I've brought to you logical deductive syllogisms. I've brought to you your classical Orthodox Muslim scholars to appeal to anything fringe and anything outside of what I have brought. I think it should do both of us a disservice, because we can actually make progress in understanding why you do not have a good answer to these questions. Or maybe you do. I'm yet to hear.
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, you asked me if there was, I didn't quite make out the name, but there was one tafsir that you asked me if it was French. I couldn't make out really the name, but it didn't sound like a name I was familiar with, so I said I'm not familiar with who you said. And you went on to use that to say, well, maybe I'm just kind of taking, I think you said a reformist or liberal approach or something. Now my thing is this. Do you know, so uh you're right that I'm raising questions about like, hey, why are you choosing these fringe people, or why are you choosing like these? The key thing that I'm trying to make and mention is not just like that they're French. I'm not claiming that Ibn Kathir is French, but that there's selective. And I'll give you an example. So the person that you just quoted, I'm not familiar with this person. And I'm sure this will raise questions to people like, wait, why is this guy giving dawah and talking about these people when he doesn't even understand them? Here's why. Because I I have I wouldn't say I've studied like extensively. I would say like I have very basic study. I kind of like taken intro courses, and to be honest, didn't really pay that much attention. So I'm by no means an expert or even a serious student. But but me, like I go through like certain references, and I'm just curious why you've select. So this person you mentioned, the tafsir you mentioned, I couldn't quite make out the name, but even Ibn Kathir, I'm wondering like where, how have you learned about these tafsirs? My hunch, I might be wrong. My hunch, not maybe not with you, but with other people who like, there's a lot of people who kind of like do a lot of work on like attacking Islam. And again, I'm making it very clear. I don't think you're that person. There's a lot of people online, and they kind of have like their whole project, their whole like they made a career out of just attacking Islam. They have spent hours researching, looking into different tafsir, trying to, or tafsirs, where they're trying to find these these commentaries so that they can use to bolster their like Islamophobic agendas. Now, and then they put them up on a website somewhere for like other people who hate Islam can read and learn, and be equipped on like how to quote unquote attack Islam. So when I say like Ibn Kathir is selective, I'm like, it's very weird for someone like yourself, and I mean this with all due respect. It could be you, it could even be myself, how you come across these commentaries. I don't think it's I have done, I've tried to study Islam on my own, and I've done that because I'm Muslim. And it's by no means extensive. So I don't know if I can honestly say that you have extensively studied to the extent, to the point where you've kind of like read different commentaries, stumbled upon Ibn Kathir and stumbled upon this other person, and then said, "Hey, let me highlight this because this seems questionable." Is it, is that's what's going on, or is it the fact that you're kind of getting these off of a list somewhere? And that's what I mean by selective, and that's what I mean by fringe. So it like cherry pick. So let me give you something that will clarify all of this. All right, like why haven't you studied Quran? I actually just opened up the study Quran on my laptop because I have that. Like that's just like a random PDF that I have in my file on like Quranic studies. And I kid you not, I'm not like some students of like Islamic studies who are very serious. So when I say that I'm not a very serious student, I'm not even being humble. I'm just being honest. But this is a book that I would have in my on my laptop, the study Quran. I'm wondering why haven't you referred to the study Quran?